If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to Downfall Network for more cool content. What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I have another collection update for you. Got some stuff in the mail finally. I was kind of waiting on a bunch of stuff, still a bunch of stuff coming. But also hit up some record stores and found some cool little gems here. So we'll go right into it because this is a pretty mixed stack here. Our place of worship is silence with inexorable suffering. This may look familiar if you saw What's John Jammin's last segment, because he brought this up and he actually played it for me, and that's why I picked it up, because I really enjoyed it. This band only has 2 members. They're from LA and they play some really nasty old school death metal mixed in with kind of, I guess, hardcore. It kind of fits in that realm of like bands like Creeping Death, Zzooouhh, Gatecreeper. In fact, one of the members in here is actually in Zzooouhh, and their new album is absolutely fantastic if you haven't checked that out. This is way more on the distant side, and man, it just really kind of piles on the atmosphere. I guess it's blackened death metal too. It kind of fits in there. I hear more straightforward like old school death metal, but the atmosphere is definitely palpable, especially the first track, which sounds like it was recorded in hell. There is someone being tortured in the background, and I really feel for that person. Unless you did something really f***ed up, then, you know, f*** him. Really enjoyed this entire album, and I really hope that these guys get back together for another album, because this is really good. Again, good balance of just meaty riffs, lots of breakdowns, and a cold, grim atmosphere. So if you're into anything like that, definitely check these guys out. Fortresse, Metal Noir Quebecios. Now this is one I got in the Metalhead box, and this is a really interesting black metal project from Quebec, obviously. Now I did some research on these guys, and when I looked at their encyclopedia, Metallum, or Metallum, however you say it, it brought up nationalism, and I was like, oh, I'm a little worried about this one, but looking up, it's not the bad kind. It's not like white nationalism or NSBM. It's pretty much like Quebec separatists, and I really don't have like a stance on that issue at all because I'm not involved, so I really don't know much about it. But from what I gather, it's not really like a bad thing, I guess. It's just sort of a political thing that goes on there. And musically, this is really interesting. It's very atmospheric, melodic black metal. Now, I have to say, I don't like the drum machine on here. It sounds really fake, unfortunately. And it really takes away from the stuff they're doing, especially in the guitars and the vocal melodies on here, which are still like ambient screams, but they really fit the tone. Now, in between these songs, there are some interesting like folk melodies. Like, I don't know, it's very strange, but it kind of ties in pretty well to it. And there are a couple of tracks on here, I believe 2 and 3, that actually have unifying melodies. There are melodies that repeat in both tracks that are the same. So it's kind of like a, you know, weird little kind of carry on from the next track. I have to say some of the songs run a little long in terms of like they don't change around the riff. They kind of stay in that, you know, heavy tremolo picking, and it's the same melody. I'm like, man, I just need this to move to something different after a while. But overall, I really enjoyed this. Now, this is the reissue on Sepulchral Productions. This actually came out in 2006. This reissue, I believe, was 2013 or 2014. I forget which. But pretty solid stuff. Definitely different. Not necessarily in my wheelhouse, but I enjoyed a good chunk of this. So yeah, definitely check these guys out if you haven't heard of them. They're pretty solid. Rader, Guardian of Fire. This is the other one I got in the Metalhead box. This is their debut album. Came out in 2020, and I believe this is self-released. And this is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be more like trad metal, and this is actually more death thrash. Really solid, straightforward death thrash. It kind of reminds me a lot of like Testament, mixed that with like Skeleton Witch and Witchery. So kind of maybe blackened thrash in some spots, but very, very riffy. It kind of sticks to its guns a little too hard in terms of like the beats being kind of repetitive, but it has that drive and energy throughout this entire album. I think the songs do run a little bit long, especially for what they're going for, because generally when I think of death thrash, I think of short, violent bursts, and these are more like long, steady marches of just pummeling you with riffs. And honestly, the death metal aspect mostly comes from the vocals on here. Solid debut for these guys, though. I definitely want to check out more by them, and yeah, I totally recommend this. Definitely check it out. Enter Arma, Garbers Days Revisited. This is their covers album that recently came out, and I have to say, this is a really wild listen in terms of the approaches they take and the songs they choose. Opening track is Ministry's Scarecrow, and it is the most sludgy, dissonant version of it. Like, you think the original is particularly creepy and nasty sounding, and it is. This is a very different approach to it and just grimy. But in terms of grime, nothing beats their version of Neil Young's Southern Man. It is an evisceration. They turn it into a blackened sludge song, and my god, the bridge even includes blast beats, tremolo, but it works with the melody, and my god, it is just nasty. It's almost kind of disturbing. The only part that really reminds me of the original song is the opening part, because that's where the clean vocals are. The rest of it is all shrieks and screams, and there's tons of reverb on it, and I really enjoyed it. But we also get, March of the Pigs, 9 Inch Nails, and a really straightforward cover of Running Down the Dream by Tom Petty. Solid. It actually sounds pretty much just like a heavier version of the original, and they did a really good job. And of course, we have Purple Rain, which, man, I was kind of hitting the feels a little bit. Those tracks were back to back between Running Down the Dream and Purple Rain. I was like, man, two artists that had a huge impact on me as a kid and an adult, both gone way too soon. But they did a great job on this. This is a fantastic covers album, just because I like they put a lot of their own touch on it and really incorporated some elements that you just really wouldn't think of in terms of throwing it in there. Definitely check this out. Check out anything by Enter Arma. They're amazing. I absolutely love this band. But yeah, this is another solid release. Granted, it's not their original material, but they absolutely killed it. Rebel Wizard, Magickal, Mystical, Indifference. This came out this year on Prosthetic Records. It is a one-man Australian blackened heavy metal band, and this is their third album. My first exposure to them, honestly. And musically, it's pretty much that. I would say a little bit of thrash metal in there, definitely some Bay Area sort of riffage in there. And I like the music. Drums, you can definitely tell it's a drum machine, but it's a pretty solid program because it does sound kind of real. The vocals kill it because they are all buried in distortion. They sound like they were sang through a crackly CB radio, and it really kills because you have these killer melodies and then no real vocal hook over them. In fact, the vocals are so out front, it kind of kills the melodies, which sucks because the music is good, because there's a lot of cool blackened heavy metal coming out right now, like just straight up riff rock mixed with black metal, and I really enjoy that sort of thing. But man, this just missed the mark, unfortunately, and it could have been really good. Maybe a different vocal approach on this would have really changed my opinion on it, but overall, I just was taken out of it just because of the vocals, which is really sad. But I'd still recommend checking it out. Check out all these. This is just my opinion. Definitely form your own. Don't just listen to me. Check it out for yourself. Okay, the next three are by the same band, so I'm just kind of going to run through them. And that band is Blood Freak. Now, this is their 2014 release, Squalor. And out of the three I got, this one is definitely my favorite. These guys pretty much embody that sort of death grind sound, like mixing Exhumed and Carcass with bits of Autopsy. And just overall fun. Now, this one I think has longer songs, and this is a little bit more towards the death metal side. More notable melodies on here too. These guys really kind of capture that old school feel, and it is just loaded with killer riffs, killer leads, and of course just ridiculous song titles. Bowing at the Altar of Smut. That's great. Tentacles from the Void. Disco Deathbox. One word. So pretty much it's not super serious. I mean, look at this album cover and it's just nuts. I absolutely love this release. This one was really fun, and I strongly recommend this one if you're going to check out Blood Freak. And the next one from Blood Freak I have is Total Destruction of the Human Form, which came out in 2017 on Horror Pain Gore Productions. Definitely like that label. This one is a little bit different. Now, Squalor and pretty much all the other ones I have by Blood Freak have samples from grindhouse horror movies from the 70s and probably 80s, and man, I gotta say, those definitely create a cool atmosphere, and some of the stuff they sample is just really, really messed up. Just, yeah. But anyway, this one kind of skips all that. There's really none of those samples on there, and it kind of makes for a little bit drier album. Now, musically, I think this one's really good. It was a lot of fun to listen to, but it was kind of missing that element. But this is a little bit more towards the death metal side. Like, I would say this is closer to straight up death metal. A lot of the grind elements seem dialed down. But, again, missing those little samples, especially when I was used to those from all the other albums, I kind of just wasn't as immersive. But still, I really enjoyed this album, you know, for definitely what it was, just a straight up death metal album. Just kind of missed that element. Definitely check this out, though. And finally, we have their debut album, Sleaze Merchants. Now, this one is kind of odd, at least in terms of the information I was looking up on it, because it says Maniac Neil did all the stuff on here, but it has other musicians listed on here. But looking at their Encyclopedia Metalum profile, those other musicians weren't listed as even former band members, so I don't know if they were just made up names for Maniac Neil, who is the guy that's the head of this entire project. I don't know, it's just kind of odd. Anyway, this is their debut. It has all the horror movie samples you could ever want, and pun-related titles, and just ridiculous ones. The Cult of Cannibal Freaks, Werewolf of Gorgor, Blood, Blood, and More Blood. Fun, over-the-top horror stuff. Now, I have to say, the vocals on this are way different, at least the ones I have here. Like, they are more distorted, like you have those ultra-low, gurgly ones that have definitely been tweaked in the studio. Kind of distorted screams here and there. And musically, this is definitely more on the grind side. Still some death metal elements on there. Definitely the old-school Carcass, like, you know, Reek of Putrefaction and Symphonies of Sickness sort of vibe. And there's even some flat-out punk moments on here, too. But overall, I really dig this one, too. This is a killer album as well. I need to get more of their stuff. Outside of the ones that I brought up, all I had was Mindscraper, which Mindscraper is also really good, notably more of a death metal album, too. But these guys definitely corrected some wild, different albums. I think I'm just missing maybe one or two from them. Either way, check out this one. Check out all those from Blood Freak. Just check out Blood Freak. They're a lot of fun. Delirium Zzooouhh. That's spelled with 2 Z's, 3 O's, 1 U, and 2 H's. I don't know what that's all about. Anyway, this is the 2011 reissue of their 1990 debut album. And these guys only had one album, and they were just a flat-out 3-piece death doom band. Really interesting sound. Pretty much just take, like, Candlemass and then mix in, like, Death and Autopsy. And pretty much you'd have their sound. Now, I have issues with the mix on here. The drums are very forward, and the guitars are really buried in here. And even the vocals kind of carry over them by a lot. But I'm not going to go too much into this, because one album seems like a good idea for a retro review. Give this a little bit more exposure and a little bit more backstory. But I would definitely say check this out, because if you like old school death doom, it's a good chance you probably would dig this. So definitely check it out, and we'll think about doing a retro review for this one. Triumvir Foul, Urine of Abomination EP. This came out last year on Heathen Resistance, Era Vulgaris Records, but I believe it was issued through $20 spin. This is some insane sounding blackened death metal, or just straight up old school death metal. First off, there's a lot of noise on here, and man, the noise is just grating. It's like someone cranking TV static while like chewing on bones over a bullhorn. It's just a bit much. But when it comes down to the music, this is really solid. Like, it is very raw, distant, ugly death metal. And this actually includes their demo, An Oath of Fire and Blood, from 2014. And I have to say, that is a very different sounding demo compared to the bulk of this album. It actually kind of has more of a like Swedish death metal buzzsaw tone versus the more murky, distant sound that's more like Incantation on the rest of this album. Interesting stuff. I definitely want to check out more by this band, but man, I really hope they dial down the noise, because some of those just really take me out of it. Like, it's just squealing dissonance in between tracks and then at the beginning of tracks sometimes. And yeah, it kind of takes me out of it, but overall, I really like the songwriting on here, and man, this is just insanely heavy. Definitely check it out, though. It's pretty wicked. Solothus, Realm of Ash and Blood. This came out this year on 20 bucks spin. I've meant to get a copy of this a while ago, and it kind of just slipped my mind, and finally got one, and it finally got here. And this is some really cool Finnish death doom. Now, this is an interesting release because it actually has kind of an American sound in some spots, like kind of like American sludge metal. The leads can be really, really bluesy, and there's some flat-out like crowbar riffs on here. But it definitely captures that death doom atmosphere, very similar to Temple of Void. Though I have to say, vocally they have a great growler, but sometimes some of these melodies require maybe just a different approach. Like, he kind of stays in one range, which is fine for most of this, but there are some spots where I think they could really just kind of make that song stand out by changing it around. Absolutely love all these somber melodies on here, but what really stood out to me were the leads. The leads on here are very incredible, very like virtuoso-ish. Lots of feel to them, and they can be very shreddy and technical, too. I was really just taken back by that. Awesome release. I really, really dig this one. I definitely want to check out more by this band. I know they have some other releases, and unfortunately, looking around, I'd have to go with international purchases, and that takes a pretty long time to get here, especially now during the pandemic still. But I strongly recommend checking these guys out. This was a solid listen. Bedsore. This is their self-titled EP. Now, this is only 2 tracks, and I have to say both these tracks pop up on the new album that's coming out this weekend. So I'm just going to keep this one kind of brief. It came out on Inverted Human Records. Now, they are in 20 bucks spin now. And this features At the Mountains of Madness, excellent Lovecraftian reference, I love that story, and Brains on the Tarmac, which I just like that title. That's pretty wicked. Now, both those songs appear on their new album. I checked. But this is definitely the more raw, like, demo version of them, and I thoroughly enjoy them in that form, too. I've heard Brains on the Tarmac so far, so I could compare the two, and solid stuff. It's very atmospheric death metal, maybe a little blackened. Sometimes I would even say it's kind of psychedelic. Like, this is some really wild, immersive, like, atmospheric stuff. And I thoroughly enjoy it. So I can't wait to hear that new album, and I'm more likely going to order that one as well. So yeah, definitely check this one out if you can find it, but definitely check out the new one that's coming up, because I have a good feeling that it's going to be pretty epic. Check it out. Horrid, As We Forget Our Past. Now, this is the 6th album from these guys. They are an Italian, straightforward, like, old-school death metal band. A little bit of a Swedish death metal leaning, especially with the guitar tone, and you hear that right away. I have to say there's a lot of compression on this mix, especially the drums. Like, everything feels kind of dry. But this is definitely in the realm of dismember worship. And I should also note the spine has a typo. It says, Has We Forget Our Past. And yeah, no, it's just kind of fun to say. Has we? Has we? Either way. This came out on Dunkelheit Productions, and pretty straightforward, just old school death metal. There's a couple of tracks in here I didn't get into because I think they just had a little bit of fun with just making weird guitar noises to tag the end of a riff, and it really just took me out of it because it was just there, and it really didn't seem to contribute much to the song other than make it stand out for a not great reason. But overall, pretty solid release. I have one other album from them I think that was pretty solid as well. I want to get some of their earlier stuff and actually see what they sounded like before, but this is a pretty solid new album, and I definitely recommend you check it out, especially if you like old school death metal and Swedish death metal. Zombi, 2020. This is their new album, and this is the first one in a while that I've heard guitars in. Generally, it's synth and drums, for the most part. And this is only a 2-man project. And they pretty much get their name from the Italian release of, I believe, Night of the Living Dead, or Day of the Dead, or Dawn of the Dead, one of the Deads. But that's how they released it in Italy with that name, I believe. And they're also huge fans of Goblin, which are noted for scoring tons of horror movies with their really dark synths. And that is a big part of their sound. But this is really interesting when they mix in the guitars, because I got, like, hints of, like, sort of 80s prog and new wave, like, Yes in the 80s around, like, Owner of a Lonely Heart, or Rush in the 80s, like, you know, Limelight, Tom Sawyer, Subdivisions, stuff like that. Really solid writing. My only complaint here is a lot of the songs seem too short. Like, there should be more song, and they kind of all go in like a really long fade out. So they kind of end very similarly, and it just feels like there could have been, like, a bigger ending or like more of a continuation of it. But overall, I really enjoy this. It has a really cool mood to it. And how they structure these songs is really fun. Like, the amount of, variety they get with these dark synths and, like, bass and drums. The guitars are more on the minimal side. Occasionally you get, like, a cool solo and stuff, but for the most part, it's just kind of there to back up whatever wild synth line they have in here. Killer album, though. I absolutely love this. This was just fun to listen to, and this should be the score to some cool 80s sci-fi movie. Loved it. Definitely check these guys out. Check out all their releases. These guys are awesome. Book of Black Earth, The Feast. Now, I have their other two albums that follow this one. This was their full-length debut on 20 Bucks Spend back in 2006. I was actually probably back before I knew about that label. And this is definitely different than the other two releases I have. Those were a little bit sludgier and honestly a little bit duller. This is more straightforward black and death metal. It's definitely murky and sludgy. I don't necessarily like how the drums are mixed on here, but I love the overall feel of this album. It has like keyboards and spots that remind me of like Emperor, but big, nasty death metal riffs left and right. Vocals, I think, are a little flat on this, but overall, pretty solid. They kind of fit the music. They do have some industrial elements, which I thought were kind of interesting, at least on one track that had a drum machine and it really had a flat-out industrial feel. And there are some female cleans that pop up towards the end, but overall, I really enjoyed this. Actually, I enjoyed this a bit more than the other two albums I had, because I didn't really get into those. I kind of bought the first one, thought it was okay, then the second one, it really wasn't getting into, and that was the last one. They've kind of all just disappeared or moved on to other projects. But, yeah, pretty solid album. And in terms of their back catalog, I would say this is the one I'd recommend. So definitely check this one out. And finally we have Pyre, Human Hecatomb, or Hecatomb. I don't know how to say that word. This came out in Chaos Records, which I believe is based in Mexico, I think. And this band is from St. Petersburg, Russia, so that's a hell of a long distance there. This is quite a bit different than the one that just recently came out that I loved so damn much. I also love this one. It is definitely more along the lines of Swedish death metal, but it also has that very dry vocal approach. Like, I think it's quite a bit drier than it is in the new album. And a little bit higher. It definitely, screams Martin Van Drunen, so Asphyx, Early Pestilence. And I think musically, I think there's maybe a little bit more melody on this one. I don't know. I think the leads really stand out a little bit more, but the lead tone is just crispy on this. Either way, really enjoyed this. I'm so glad I've discovered this band, because I really enjoy all their stuff. Definitely recommend checking these guys out. Solid release. I strongly recommend the new one too, but this is also really good. So check it out. So that knocks out another one of these. We are going to get working on a bunch of other stuff, of course. Still listening to a lot of Black Sabbath, because that's going to take a while, but it's going to happen. And definitely some album reviews coming in the future for sure. Going to do some more retro reviews, because those seem like they were a lot of fun. You guys seem to like them. So stay tuned for a whole bunch of cool stuff. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. Thank you guys for watching.